As Kelly had mentioned, I've been working for about 20 years with business owner-operators in going through the process of modernization. And so what modernization essentially is taking something that you used to have a market, used to do really well, but time keeps moving things. And so we went from changing who we used to be to who we need to be in the future. Our country has gone through a pretty sizable change in the last 5 years. The economic change, we've heard about this concept called income gap, all have had an impact, particularly on the at-home or the out-of-home family entertainment business, which bowling is a big part of. So our customers in the past will not be the customers in the future. And if you're experiencing that as a center right now, that is something that you really need to be thinking about is, are the people that I service today going to be my customers in 10 years? So I want to talk to you a little bit about the concept of going to the next level with your center. So basically what we want to get into is talk about modernization. I want to talk today about a couple of different things. First off, let's talk about some concepts. We look at the FEC world now and the bowling hybrid center world in three ways when we are as people who are looking at this from an economically viable perspective. One is an adult center, the second is a family center, and the third would be a mix of those two different centers. Now, there's been lots of examples of family centers out there. There's some decent examples of the adult center. The mixed center is honestly where a lot of existing bowling centers looking to go through a conversion. That's the market where most of you will find yourself in. It's probably the most challenging of the markets that you need to go through. So when we start getting into, just keep going, there we go. We have some decisions to make. And so what I'm going to do today, why don't we just, until all the little things come out. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the decisions. What market do we go after? How much is it going to cost me to develop this? And what are the ingredients? In other words, what should be in my center when we start developing it? So let's start with, I guess, what I call the hybrid gallery. When you take a look at images of all of these, every one of these pictures that you see is actually an existing center that's gone through modernization. And I won't bore you with the pictures of the before, and we've kind of left those out in this presentation, because we all know what before looks like. But when you look at the guest entrance and the guest service area, you look at the lanes with monitors down them, and an arcade, and banquet facilities, and laser tag, and upscale restaurants, and things like that, all of these things came from a modernized center. The upside to this, and the real benefit of it is, you have a big box normally. Even if you have anywhere from 20 lanes up to these huge mega centers of the days in the past, you have lots and lots of space. So let's start by talking about the adult concepts. And when we look at adult concepts, how many have been into some of the centers that are out there these days, the new ones? Pinstripes, Main Event, Dave & Buster's, which of course is now getting into our area, bowling. A lot of them have a couple things in common, but when you start looking at an adult concept center, the experience is what you're selling. You're no longer in the bowling business. And that's a big change that you have to start thinking about is, what is it that I am delivering now? The reality is, and I've said this probably 3 or 4 times at Bowl Expo, nobody wakes up to make plans with their friends to go lob 13-pound balls down, at a 70, 80-foot lane. That's not what we're looking for anymore. That's the sports bowler. That's the person who is in it because they enjoy the sport of bowling. An adult center is really focused more on, I want to socialize with my friends. So food, drink, social, play, sharing, having an experience is really what they are looking for. So what we build, and sometimes we've said it and it's not always true, it's not a restaurant with a bowling center in the back, but it's an entire environment designed to help me as a millennial, as a empty nester, as a variety of different ages, find a way to spend time with my friends. Now, I can have kids, right? My kids can come along, and that's okay. There may be certain times, like after 8:30, 9 o'clock, kids aren't welcome anymore. But the reality is that it's an adult experience, and we want to be able to socialize with our friends. That's what it's there for. Why don't you give us a click? So when we start looking at some of the experiences, I mean, this is a fairly different look than most bowling centers that I've been in the United States. How many have a restaurant that looks like this? One. Excellent. Couple? Chances are, if this is something that it doesn't look like right now, if you're going after adults, it's going to have a feel similar to this in the future. This is even more, I guess, sophisticated than what you might see in the older main events or some of the other ones. But this is exactly the type of style that you would see, like in a pinstripes or some of those types of things. So when we start looking at this adult experience, what we're going for really is this. Millennials are the future of our industry. And when we start talking here a little bit more as to who our market is, they're not that substantially larger than Generation X, which is people from about 30 years old to about 45, 50 years old. They're not that much younger than them. They're not that much greater of a bulge, but they have a completely different attitude as to how they live their lives. The nice thing about young people, especially in that 25 range, typically they don't have kids yet. They're not married. They don't have a mortgage. They may have a car payment, but they can drive around in a car that's kind of a beater, and that's okay. They might be living in an apartment. They might be living in mom's and dad's basement, which is happening more now. But what they have that we certainly should be interested in is the discretionary income. They've got the money to spend on an experience like this. So you take a look at them. They're having a great time. There's bowling in the background. They've got a menu in front of them. They're in an adult experience. They're coming in, they're visiting, they're having fun. Food and alcohol account for probably 60% of the revenue in a center like this. The bowling and the entertainment, it's still there. People are still coming to have fun in that kind of experience. But one of the things that you really got to stop to think about is that food and beverage is going to be a bigger part of your economy if you get into this adult market. But it's very lucrative. It's more lucrative than chain restaurants. It's more lucrative than a lot of things. That's why you're starting to see large companies start getting into this industry. Last fall, we had a center open up in Chicago by Namco. Namco is one of the largest game manufacturers in the United States. They have bowling. They have vintage video games. They have an upscale restaurant. They have a lot of corporate and group meeting places. So why are they getting into it? Because they've seen the numbers and they understand that this new adult market, they don't want another Macaroni Grill or they don't want another Outback Steakhouse. They're looking for something that's a little bit different. And so we are really competing with the chain restaurants that do astronomical $8, $10 million in a franchise location. That's who we're going after when we go after an adult market. And so if it's where your comfort zone is, great. If it's not where your comfort zone is, I'm not here to tell you have to do it. I'm saying if you want to get into this venue, things have to start looking a little differently. Now, I put this up because this is a modern menu in an adult center. And this is a big part of what we are talking about when we speak about it. We've got craft beer. We've got a salad. We've got the most unhealthy fries imaginable because we deep fry them and then smother them with cheese. We've got some cheeseburgers over here. We could spend a whole seminar talking about food, and I imagine that there is one. But the reality is it's more of a pub style, okay? They're looking for something, not the filet mignon, not the, full spread dining experience. What they're looking for is something that will absorb the alcohol, taste good, and more importantly, look good. If you serve this in a plastic basket, which I had a client I was working with here 4 months ago, fabulous menu. Plastic basket, wax paper, completely blew the entire value proposition. By putting it on a plate, by serving the beer in a pint glass, it immediately allows your price, what you can charge, to come up. So it's not just about the food, it's about the presentation. What does that food look like? All right, let's move to the next one. So when we start looking at concepts, we start looking at the adult, that's the big, let's bring up, so the little thing comes up on the side. Let's talk a little bit about that. We're going to move now into the family venue, which is the second concept, which a lot of people are really interested in these days. And I'll tell you a secret, it's still built for adults. Generation X and generation after that, the millennials, they're looking for an experience for themselves. We have in the industry this thing called the Chuck E. Cheese effect, right? Nobody who's an adult wants to go to a Chuck E. Cheese. It's just you avoid it like the plague. And there's video after video that you can see out there on YouTube as to what's going on in Chuck E. Cheese restaurants. But the reality is, most people, when they think family entertainment center or like one of these bowling centers with an arcade, immediately their mind goes to Chuck E. Cheese. And so even out of the box, even after we just finished converting it, if it doesn't look new and it doesn't look like a different concept, people will immediately go back to their memory of, oh yeah, a bunch of screaming kids, and it just doesn't seem like fun. So when we build for a family market, we also have to make sure that mom and dad are taken care of. And that's really an important part of it. So let's go to the next slide. So when we start looking at the concepts, obviously we have great experiences. And I love this one. This is one that actually one of my clients just sent me from this weekend from Father's Day. They had a big bowling pin and they had kids and dads pose at the center. That's creating an experience, right? That's creating play. It's dad coming down to the kids level. But when you start looking at it, instead of having just the classic snack bar with the pizza and the items that again go in the plastic basket, what about having a candy bar and tie it to your redemption center? In other words, you can win points. Points can be redeemed in a candy bar. You've got other concepts, of course, birthdays. So when we start looking at this, we start looking at how do we develop an experience that really is designed and built around having that fun play. So family arcade centers have some other things too, and we'll go back here in a second to that layout that we had. They've got laser tag, they've got an arcade typically. When you look at all of the square footage, bowling is going to be a very strong revenue profit center for you. Food is going to be probably 35-40% of your revenue still. So food is strong, alcohol is going to be there as well. The number one most profitable part of a hybrid center, a center built for families, is without a doubt going to be the game room. Game rooms and arcade are a very lucrative part of having a family center. And a lot of centers that I work with, they have an operator right now, right? They just have somebody else manage it. Well, the dirty secret that you may not know is if they are running that game room well, are making a tremendous amount of profit on it. And you have rev share, so you kind of see some of it. But put in new games, put in new experiences, and the next thing you know, your center really takes on a completely different feel to it. So let's take a look. Obviously, we've got video games. Many bowling centers who have really high ceilings in your center, at least over the concourse. So if you pull out some lanes and you start looking, you probably have enough height to do some really spectacular things. This is one center that we work with who put in an 8-post ropes course above their arcade. Right? It's a spectacular experience for the kids. They're having fun downstairs. They're having fun at the games. You can see up there, there's the kids walking around on the ropes course. So you can pack a lot of revenue opportunities into that space. Now, if you've got a smaller center, if you've got 26 lanes or 20 lanes, you're going to have to really decide, how many lanes do I pull out? How many lanes, for this experience? Game rooms, traditionally, you don't want to go any smaller than about 4,000 feet. So, I don't know, is that 8, 12 lanes? Somewhere in there. Laser tag centers, the smallest that we ever recommend is about 3,500 feet. So when you start looking at, what do I do with my space? I can't get rid of all my lanes because I've got leagues still. That kind of becomes a challenge. But chances are that your leagues are going to be spending less time in the center on a Friday or a Saturday, and your families are going to take over. So the powerhouse time during families and the powerhouse revenue for families comes down to having an experience on Friday and Saturdays. How we get revenue is a little different than maybe how you've seen it before. We as an organization or as a country are a country of planners. The better people that we want to go after, I wouldn't say better, but the people who have generally a higher income, which makes us a much better experience, those people traditionally want to know what they're going to expect. So when are you going to see them? Well, you're going to see them during parties, birthday parties and things like that. You're going to see them during groups. So they're going to plan a group of kids to come in, and maybe a bunch of families together. They're still going to do bowling. That will be part of the experience, right? I'm going to spend some time bowling. I'm going to spend some time in the arcade. I'm going to spend some time eating. That's kind of what that experience is going to look like. And so food and arcade and bowling all have to be there, but you need to have programming. So you need to make sure that you have a good party staff, a group of people who introduce them, show them how to play, get them through the center. Typically a birthday party is going to be 90 minutes long. Sometimes it goes 2 hours. But you're going to have somebody kind of move them through that experience. So it isn't just setting them up on the lane, bringing the pizza out, bringing out a cake. It's developing an actual process. Now, you're going to want to communicate that, of course, but beyond it, you're going to have to really structure it. It's realistic when you start looking at, open play, people just coming in and playing versus birthday parties and organized groups. 40 to 60% of your revenue in the future will be birthday party or groups. And I'll tell you the biggest secret that I tell my clients. Every kid who comes to a birthday party becomes a future customer. So the more birthday parties you do, think of instead of just getting one customer coming in, you've got 8 or 10. Because you can do things like leave reason to return coupons and do things to incentivize those other kids to come in after the birthday party's over. So group play is a big part of modernizing a center more towards a family. And when you start looking at some of the play experiences, the ropes course is kind of over the top. Do people come to the center just for the ropes course? No, I'm probably not going to be coming to a particular venue just simply because you have a ropes course. It's the whole mix of the experience. And I've seen some very expensive, very well-built centers fail because the experience wasn't there, even though they spent a lot of money on the lanes and on the attractions and along those things. So families are really more about play and creating that play sensation. So when we start looking at a menu, I showed you a picture of a menu of that adult experience, and it was pub fare, sophisticated, served on plates. It's still hamburgers and fries, but it was a very sophisticated version of hamburgers and fries. When we start looking at a menu for a family-driven center, this is a center actually in Michigan called BAM. It still does have alcohol and things in it, but you've got wraps, you've still got your pizza. I don't think you'd ever have a bowling center without pizza. You do have some appetizer entrees and things like that. And this is a pretty complex menu. You could probably get away with cutting about a third of the menu items out. But the reality is, when you go back and look how it was designed, there isn't a lot of core ingredients in here. I can do a salad, and the salad can also be a wrap, and it can also be ingredients for other items in your entrees. So having somebody work with you to develop a menu to be able to look this comprehensive but still have a fairly few number of ingredients is a really good idea. Does this menu overwhelm anybody here who may have a traditional snack bar, or is this something that you guys have seen and it's not? Okay, well, I'm glad to see not many hands go up. How many people are doing a menu that kind of looks like this right now? Good. I started giving presentations about modernization in 2011 here at BPAA, and everybody's eyes glazed over when they saw this. So I'm glad to see that people are starting to wake up and understand that food is a very important part of this process. So we've got our family experience. It's all about play. It's all about fun. It's catering to groups. Let's move into the next, which is, of course, the mix. When you start taking a look at the mix, you have to have a bit of the sophisticated. You have to have a bit of the play. And you have to have a concourse because you still have your league base. So this is where I would suggest, if you've got a center with 30 lanes or more, this is probably where you're going to want to look pretty hard. Now, the upside is that you can cater to almost anyone, adults, to the families, to the league player, the sport player. You can cater to a variety of different populations. The downside is cost. To do everything is not inexpensive. It sometimes is. Your restaurant offerings are going to be $1.5 million to $2 million. Putting in an arcade is going to be $1.5 million. I mean, you have some expense in there. But if you've got the footprint, and that one I just showed you, that family experience, that was only a 26-lane center. So he was able to do it. He did sacrifice some lanes. He had to bring some lanes out to do it. But if you've got a larger center, this is certainly a concept that is fun. And fun is the key word, because we're doing bowling, both sport, Kids Bowl Free, the youth leagues, all of the bowling traditional things that we do. We still do the arcade, we do food, but we also have a bar. We do events, which we'll get into here in a second. We'll do kids and we'll do the leagues, as we mentioned. So it's kind of everything in one. So let's look at the next one. So this gives you an idea of what it might look like when you start laying it out. So I'm going to give you a walk through a center that is a traditional center. So you look, it's typical bowling area. And you take a look over here. We've got meeting rooms, and we've got a bar. We've got children's play. These lanes, let's see if my little pointer works here. These lanes over here on the far end are all going to be sacrificed for the game in the laser tag area. So those will come out. On this side, we're going to lose the first 6 lanes to a VIP suite. And this becomes the adult side of the center. This over here becomes the family side of the center. In the middle, that's where everybody bowls. That's where your league players are going to continue to play. So you still have a snack bar. You still have a lounge, which becomes much more sophisticated like we saw. But when you walk through the front entrance, you get a choice. Families to the left, adults to the right, leagues straight in. So that is probably the most common if we were to look at templates of how to kind of appease everybody. And if you're in a market that has mostly adults, if you're in a market that has mostly kids, you may veer to one of the other concepts that we talked about. But if you're in a smaller market of 100,000 or 200,000 or less, then you want to look at being as versatile as possible. So when we start looking at this mix, this kind of everything, you have 5 different markets. You have your adults, you have your kids, you have your leagues, then you have your corporate and group events. Okay? And the last group that you've got are the children's groups. Kids coming in the summertime, summer camps, day camps, so large groups of kids. So when you start looking at operationally, how do I do this? You really have to think of yourself as almost being 3 different businesses. Food operations, bowling operations, and play operations, right? Food has to handle the banquets, and they have to handle the snack bars and things like that. Bowling operations you're probably very comfortable with if you had a traditional center. The third one is the play operations, right? So this takes care of the game room and the laser tag and things like that. Tends to be the easiest of the 3 to manage because it's all motherboards. Something breaks, you pull out a motherboard, you put a new motherboard in. So it tends not to be very complicated. But you do have redemption, which is prizes. We know what redemption is. It's you can win prizes in the games. You have a redemption counter or a store. So when you start looking at how do we lay this out, it's again, families on one side, adults on the other side. Here's why you do it. A millennial and an 8-year-old are like oil and water. And we have oil customers and we've got water customers. And sometimes you have a couple different age groups that are water customers. Empty nesters love seeing 8-year-olds run around because it reminds them of their time when they had kids in the house. 20-year-olds don't want to see 8-year-olds run around. So we want to create kind of natural dividers, different spaces for different populations, and you don't want to combine the two. Let's go to the next one here. So let's talk about groups, which is another part of the mixed dynamic, and it's certainly a part of the economy of the adults when we start getting into adult dynamics. VIP suite is kind of the hallmark, if you will. A lot of current centers are taking the jump and putting in that VIP center to begin with. How many have done VIP? Okay, so we have a couple. So basically, here's the trick to VIP. Women won't go bowling. Guys will want to compete, right? We're all guys. We want to show how well we can win at something to show off in front of our girls. So what ends up happening? The guys will end up bowling. There's always, the super woman athlete who goes in and beats them all, typically. And so you have very few of the guests who are at the VIP suite, maybe a third, maybe 40%, will actually go bowling. The women will all want to sit around with a good cocktail in their hand. So if you get into VIP suites, you better have a martini, you better have a continental, you better have a bartender who really understands how to do some of the more stylish types of libations. When we start talking about alcohol, which is really more in this venue, in this adult area, there's a couple things to consider. Craft beer, of course, is taken off and it's starting to kind of go through that adoption curve. Wine bars is another concept, depending on where you are regionally. If you have a lot of wine in your area, having a sophisticated wine list is important. But now we're starting to get into sophisticated and boutique liquors. So I'm from a little town called Traverse City, Michigan. We've got 4 distilleries that have been built. And the distilleries are doing a very nice job of creating libations that are very interesting to particularly millennials. Millennials are drinking liquor at a much higher rate than the Generation X was. So I'm in Generation X, I'm 46. I love craft beer. I've loved craft beer for 20 years I've loved craft beer. So I'm always happy to see that there's 10, 12 different options of craft beer. But increasingly, I'm seeing that the millennials would rather have a sophisticated cocktail. So having a bar operation that understands it usually comes down to a staff of 3 or 4 people who really understand how to kind of diversify. Getting more taps. Traditionally, you see 5 taps in a bowling center. Getting up to 10 or 12 taps is probably a good idea. Having a wine selection, you can just work with a wine rep in your area, but getting a wine rack and actually having some bottles that you can sell, along with a couple of good by-the-glass house blends, is also a really good idea. Why? Because this is a more sophisticated market. This isn't the Miller Lite crowd anymore. This isn't the league bowler who comes and has his beer every week. This is a more sophisticated marketplace. And at the center of it is your VIP and your group settings. We can move to the next one. So the other side of it is banquet. Banquet's a little bit harder. So banquet is an area where you may or may not want to go into, but I felt that we should talk about it a bit. So we've got in this room right now, about 75, 80 people? Could you adequately cater an event to this group of people? What type of staff do you need in your restaurant offerings in order to pull something like this off? And it becomes very important when you start really looking at, well, I don't think I can. Don't try then. Make that a plan B or C. Make it a future development. We'll create banquet space later. It can be very lucrative, okay? Instead of a per person rate of $15 to $20, you're looking at a per person rate of $65 to $100. I have clients who do not 100, but $50,000 activities in a hybrid bowling center. One night, 6 hours, $50,000. So the revenue is there, but finding the expertise, finding the staff to make it happen is also a big part of it. So I just wanted to touch on banquet. I recommend when we look at banquet type facilities, we typically look at what we call buffet or family style. So if you do have people seated, you're going to have 3 or 4 platters. It makes it much easier than the individual plated. To get into everybody gets, orders off of a menu, or everybody orders off of a limited group menu, you end up with a situation where operationally it gets much more complicated. So let's talk about this mix again. How do we deal with alcohol with kids? What I have found is that millennials and Generation X, which are your 2 core markets, are pretty comfortable with having a beer while their kids are around. So the alcohol mix, where it used to be kind of a bigger deal, is not as a larger consideration. Now, again, different parts of the country. I work with some clients in Georgia. You would never have alcohol where you have families. It's kind of a no-no there. But for the majority of people that we work with, having beer. But instead of having a pitcher of Miller Lite, what do you have? A pitcher of craft. Typically, this pint glass that we see right there is $5 to $7 for the pint. Your production costs and your costs of the raw material, a little bit higher than the domestic beers, but it's much more profitable because there's a perceived value of a much higher quality product that I'm buying. So when you do a pitcher, you're not selling it on price. You're selling it on just the convenience of making sure you don't run out of beer when you want a little bit more. So having good on-lane service is another part of this. Okay? Anybody here not doing on-lane right now? On-lane service? Okay, a few people. It's something worth considering, especially if you make a dedication to your food offerings. And if you have a solid food offering, then you start getting into some of those types of choices where I can have on-lane service. It's tricky. It takes dealing with the cocktail waitresses, which in my opinion is probably the hardest thing of running a bowling center, is dealing with the waitresses. They tend to be kind of an interesting bag. But it's something that you start getting into. So let's go on. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the decisions that we have to make about doing these types of centers. So when we start looking at it, there are some modern ways in which to decide what direction should I go in. And when we start thinking about it, these things are probably the three most important, why don't you press it twice? Three most important, one more time. Three most important parts of it is understanding my market, understanding how much this is going to cost, and understanding the ingredients, what goes in it. When we start looking at the market, there's some really good data out there these days. And it's not demographics. Everybody will give you demographics. BPAA has some great demographic information. What I'm concerned about is psychographics. And it's a completely different part of a modernizing center in terms of deciding it. You take a look at these two groups right here. You've got Rust Belt traditions and you've got milk and cookies. On a demographic standpoint, there's very little difference between these two groups. There's not a whole lot to vary between the two groups. But when you start to look at what do they want to do with their lives, how do they express themselves when they have some extra money, some discretionary income? Well, the simple answer is these two groups are miles apart. So the Rust Belt traditions, this is a metric or a group of different, there's usually about 60 different types of consumers in this country in the psychographic or sociographic world. We're only interested in about 15 to 20 of them, okay? And the hard part about the realities when you start looking at market is that your customers of the past have a tremendous number of new obligations than they used to, and their income has not kept up with all of these new obligations. So we have two-income households instead of one these days, right? Back in the 1970s, you didn't really have child care like you had in the 80s and 90s because you had mom at home and you had dad working. Household income has actually been stayed about exactly the same since 1974 to 2012. That's staggering. Just stop to think how much time passed between 74 and 2012, and we were making on average household 48 in the 1970s. In 2012, we're making 52. So what ends up happening? Well, my housing expense went up, health care went up, education costs went up. Child care came on the radar because before I didn't need child care, now I do. You start looking at all of these additional expenses, all these things that now my household budget has to pay for, and pretty soon what gets bumped out? Well, an out-of-home entertainment experience, which is what we're in. So the reality is when we start looking at where the future lies in people who are making incomes in the top 25% of our population. So typically $75,000, $80,000 above. If you're in a region that has a population below 75,000, or you don't have a very large population in that ballpark, tread cautiously. Because I've had clients and I've had individuals who I've recommended, look, you just don't have the household income in your area to really have people come in and spend the money that they would spend of yesteryear. It isn't just modernizing to your customers, it's making sure that there's income there. And it's a hard part of this conversation. It is socioeconomically tied. So Rust Belt traditions, you look at the little picture, you see guys bowling, that's our classic customer. That's the person who's always been here and always made an impact on our bottom line. If I were to build a center or modernize a center and all you had were people from the past or from that same profile, my answer would probably be, do some painting, do some cleaning up, fix up your kitchen, but don't spend millions on a modernization. Because the reality is you've got a window of about 15 to 20 miles, 15 to 20 minute drive time, right? And anything outside that drive time that may have economic potential isn't going to be willing to drive that far. We've got some changes in our world these days. We've got, DUIs. We've got, increasing pressure on our time. Driving a half an hour to a center is not a reasonable expectation anymore. So when we start looking at that, we really have to understand who's in our backyard. So Rust Belt traditions, $52,000 average household income. You start looking at milk and cookies, their income's a lot higher. Their kids are young, they like to go out and play, beautiful family entertainment center market. we can go to the next slide. When we start getting into adults, in those more adult experiences, the in style. They've got good income. They may have kids, but chances are they're young enough that I'm getting my career going first, and then I'm going to have kids. We all know people who are 35, 40 years old before they really start getting into having families. That's an increasing trend that we're seeing in our country. Another thing we're starting to see is, of course, millennials are partnering. In other words, they're living together, but they put off getting married. And what's really interesting, I read a very good story about the future of the concept of marriage. The ones who are putting off marriage are doing it because of the pressures their parents put on them for grandkids. If we don't get married, they're not going to pressure us for grandkids. The minute we get married, it's, so when are we having grandkids? And so it's actually creating this adverse effect where people will live together, they're technically, common law marriage, but they don't have the peer pressure, the family pressure to have kids. And so you've got this huge group of adults called this in-style. They're fashionable, they're making good income. They may be in a townhouse right now, they may be renting, they may drive a nice car, but you look at health care and child care and all those things that we talked about with the new families and the old families being burdened with this, they don't have any of that. They also don't have to tuck their kids in at 8 o'clock every night on a weekday. They can go out. So that adult population is, again, a very realistic population. And what I find is if you have a center that has a lot of those middle-class families, chances are you'll start seeing some of this group pop in. It's kind of the new gentrification. You're starting to see young, active millennials starting to buy into some of the neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods are starting to turn over. And so if you don't have a market that has a very strong base for families, where the household income is above $70,000 or more, then look to what's your adult population look like. Because you may think, well, we got families all over the place. Well, that's probably true. Guess what? They can't afford you. And that's a really hard part of this conversation. I've seen, again, work with a lot of centers. They see a concept somewhere, they want to bring it to their own backyard. But if you don't take the time to really understand what your backyard looks like, you're in trouble. And that's one of the key things before, deciding laser tag or how many lanes to put, all of that. You need to understand what can the people in my backyard afford. And so that's a big part of this decision-making process. Up-and-coming families, to me, this group is the gold standard of hybrid centers. Okay? Mom and dad will go out and socialize on their own. They've got kids who will spend $300 to $500 on a birthday party for them. They're making typically $90,000 and above. They're actually putting money into savings. They have the IRA and some of those types of things. And to spend money celebrating with their kids is not a problem. But guess what they don't have? Time. And that's the magic seesaw that I'm seeing in this country. Used to be when you had a lot of money and a lot of time, you'd go out and have a lot of fun. People making a lot of money these days don't have as much time. People who've got more free time typically don't have a lot of money to spend. And then there's a lot of people who have no time and they're not making a lot of money. And that's just kind of what's going on in the country. Up-and-coming families will come and they will spend great money. It's nothing to spend $200 or $300 on a visit. But the trick is, you better be worth my time. In other words, I've got 4 hours to spend with my family this week because I've got a meeting coming up, or I'm traveling out of town, or I've got a lot to do. So when I do spend time with my family, you better make it worth my time. So that's where everything kind of comes back down to experience. It better be well laid out. Oh, I'm sorry. We're jumping too quick there. So it comes back to, you better make it worth my time, because time is the big thing that we're trying to get out of people anymore. If we get that upscale market, it's absolutely not a lot of trouble to again, generate a higher average ticket. But you better make sure that the word of mouth within their peer groups is strong. Oh man, we had a blast. We had a great time. We should get together as a group. You better have packaging so 3 or 4 families can come together. Can you do that right now? Lanes are awesome, right? You just get more people, you just add another lane. If you have the new couch-style seating that's not really designed for league but designed for socializing, it's awesome. You just keep adding more lanes. You have food, you've got games. When the kids are tired of playing with bowling balls and they want to go play, they can go off. Mom and dad and all the friends do what? They go into the lounge or go into the seating area, they grab a beer while their kids are having fun. They join up with their kids after the beer, finish up the experience in the game area, and they're on their way out the door. That's a 3 or 4 hour experience these days. But it's also, for a family of 4, probably $250. So this is kind of where part of that change happens, is we have to understand you have to have the income in order to accomplish the experience of what these hybrid centers can deliver these days. Now we can move. So when we start talking about the costs, and you start going through and looking at some of these different types of things, right? First thing you have to do is understand where your revenue is coming from. So in a mixed hybrid center, and that's what we're looking at here, right? You've got league bowling revenue, $250,000. Look at historically it was $400,000. It keeps going down. You've got VIP, $350,000 in revenue coming from those group settings and that adult settings. So now all of a sudden, these organized family groups and organized adult groups, their revenue outpaces your leagues. And that will continue to grow. Your leagues will continue to be a smaller part of your revenue, and groups will become a bigger part. Arcade, and this is a fairly conservative laser tag arena. You've got about $160,000 into a laser tag arena. And it's not very big. It's only 3,900 feet. Games, look at the games. $620,000. And when I said this to you guys earlier, that the big secret is if you've got an operator right now, and even if you're doing a small refresh, talk to the bank or talk to the companies that specialize in games about the idea of getting your operator out of there and putting your own games in. Payoff is usually 6 months to 18 months, depending on the game. And after that, you are making money on it. And so revenue is there, and it just dumbfounds people. So you look at the 45 games, delivering about $400,000, and you can see there's a summer and a winter. This is an area where the winter time, the revenue actually drops. We see seasonality, by the way. Most centers are, summertime, it gets dead in there. It actually will drive and reverse those trends. You start looking at Laser Maze, which is a little small box attraction. There's $50,000. By the way, those only cost $50,000, $60,000. So the first year's revenue in this model, you're about paying the thing off. So it makes good sense. Atomic Rush is another little attraction. Again, $35,000 in it. And then the last part, like we said, food, beer, and then alcohol. In this center, it's a little bit more, this is in the Midwest, so it's a little bit more beer-oriented still. In other words, craft beer is starting to take off. So you're looking at about an equal amount of alcohol to beer, and food ends up turning into about $500,000. So when you start looking at the economy, is the money here? Well, clearly it is. I mean, when you start looking at, the realities of how this all kind of comes together, and we're still getting finer and finer. In this particular case, this is one of our draft budgets that we're going through. The reality is this is a $2.5 or $3 million build out. So you do have some investment, but the revenue and the economies look different. This is not an extraordinary community. This isn't one that has 100,000 plus income with active families. This is a pretty upscale middle class area. So closer to that $70,000 in income. So any questions about some of the stuff that we're talking about here? Yep, you saw a hand go up here. Actually, I think they'll have it on the floor. I don't give a plug for the guys, but it's one of the attractions. So basically, it's a kind of a cool little thing. You can either put it inside a box, so you go inside, or sometimes they just mount it on the wall. Do you remember the game Simon Says, where you had to follow the flashing lights? It's like that times 10. So it's a big, huge wall with lights, and you have to hit certain lights. There's different types of play that you can have on it, 5 or 6 different types of play. You can have 1 kid and 2 kids. I'm sure that it'll be on the floor. Just go seek it out. Oh, I did, yeah. Creative Works is the company that makes it. They're on the floor. So again, I should probably talk a little bit about that. When you look at arcade, you have a game mix, 45 games. 70% of them will issue points or tickets. Okay? I'm a big fan of the cards, where it just puts points on your card after you win the game. So 70% should be dispensing tickets. It's basically a mini casino for kids. I mean, if all things being honest about it is you have a chance to win stuff. You can win, of course, just the regular plush toys and those types of things, but you can also win if you put a candy bar in. Works great with birthday parties where the kids go in and they kind of build a candy bouquet as part of their birthday experience. But they can win candy, which, of course, dentists all love and parents hate. But then beyond the games, you have what we call small box attractions. So laser tag and atomic rush, they're small attractions. So laser tag, big attraction, obviously 3,500, 4,000 feet. These are small ones. They still take 5 to 6 minutes to play, but they can go right in the arcade. They don't take a big footprint up. And you'll see in this industry, especially for the bowling industry, increasingly the number of people coming out with, the number of manufacturers coming out with small box play, it will continue to grow because we have a limited space, right? We're not building a 80,000 square foot arcade. So there's a limited space that we've got in there. And so when we start looking at it and we start looking at putting that mix together, I mean, there's a lot of revenue potential here, right? But the cost is there too. Again, 2.8 I think is the estimate. It kind of depends on certain things that they finally decide to do. And so you start ending up with a situation where you have to budget it out and you have to get your costs. How would I'd see who's in my backyard. So if you have a small, how big is your center? Or the center you're using in this example? It all goes back to that market. Do I have mostly young adults in my area? Do I have these up-and-coming families? Young adults, by the way, in 5 to 7 years, will become family market. In 10 years, they'll become a viable. So when it's time to do some modernization, I predict in this industry, a lot of the adult centers will be moving more towards games and birthday parties and things because their market, within that 20 minutes is going to start growing up and having kids. And so that's the next step, is to move from adult centers more into there. The reality is, if you've got a huge center, you can do both. If you're limited finances and you just want to do like one thing, the easiest one thing to do would be to go towards the VIP suite. In other words, roll it out a little bit at a time. Investing in adults, you still don't really, most centers don't have a very good offering for kids right now. In other words, if you don't have a game room or a laser tag and all you really have is bowling and a lounge, it makes a lot more sense to stick with adults and add a VIP suite for adults. Okay? Getting into the family side of things, that's typically where you're pulling out, a significant number of lanes and you're adding games and you're adding an attraction like that. To try to just do like laser tag, I see some centers I'll just put laser tag in and all my problems are solved. It's not enough to create that play experience that we talked about in the family dynamic. You have to go in with both feet if you're going after that family market where you can do a VIP suite. You can start, I guess, making your offering more sophisticated by setting up a VIP, carving out some space for a meeting area or banquet facility. The nice thing about those adult group settings is typically they want to be in there Monday through Friday. So it's not uncommon to do a 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock kind of team building meeting, right? Where they have some meeting in a space not unlike this, maybe a little smaller, and then move out to have some bowling and have lunch. And so those types of experiences are things that if anybody has any corporate environment, anything like that around you, there are people who are currently sitting in vanilla hotel rooms or vanilla hotel spaces having an experience when it's going to be much more fun to have an experience in a center like this. So there's market there. But in order to capture that market, you're going to need a sales effort. You're going to need to be able to package your center so that that professional knows you're going to deliver a good experience. The person making a decision in a corporate experience is not usually the owner or the boss. It's usually the right-hand person. And the last thing they want to do is have it go bad. So being able to communicate confidently that you have a good corporate offering, that you can do what you want to do in terms of deliver an experience, if it's a meeting and then some play, if it's whatever, that is a program change. But from a facility change, it's not as expensive. So other questions? Well, we got numbers and things out here. That's probably a question better left for the folks at Center at CreativeWorks. on the floor. They're here. It's not too far off from laser maze in my experience in terms of about a year, sometimes a little less. All right, so I've been in this industry now for about 10 years, and a traditional family entertainment center is where I've done a lot of my time. I started my first modernized center was 2011, where we took a bowling center and converted it, but my background is in that. The game world went through a crisis in about 1996, or 2006, I'm sorry, because the card systems, Embed, Intercard, are the two card reader systems. Your kid basically gets a credit card, and then they run around, and you put so much money on it, and then they go around and play games and laser tag and things. They can swipe it on the card. More sophisticated centers, you can actually go to the snack bar and buy your food with it. And then when they run out of it in 40 minutes, they're back asking for more money on the card. That's how it goes. But card reading systems have a huge advantage over the traditional tokens and ticket system, which you see a lot still on the East Coast. The shore economy is still tokens and tickets, but that's starting to change there as well. So there's three parts to it. One is the system is going to be $75,000 to $100,000. So to buy the card reading system is not cheap. Here's the upside to it. $60,000 to $70,000 in unredeemed value ends up on the cards every year. So the system actually starts paying for itself. My kid probably has 4 different game cards from 4 different centers with $5 on them that we bought, and we were ready to go, and he didn't spend it all before he left. So that's kind of a big advantage of having a card reader system, as opposed to tokens, where a kid walks out with tokens. Those things cost money. You know, if you had $5 in tokens walk out the door, that's hard cost that you're going to have to replace those tokens. Credit cards, the game cards are relatively cheap. They're like hotel cards, so they're inexpensive. I think they're a dime to manufacture, or 20 cents. So I'm a big fan of the card reader making the investment. If you have a very small offering, so if you have 20 or less games, card reader system might be more than you need. But most centers, you're going to want to at least have about 30, 35 games to start with. There is such thing as not having enough games in order for this to be effective. Well, and again, it's still one of those things. If you have that happening, I mean, that's great. It's just walking out with a $5 on a game card is a little bit more. The other thing about cards is kids don't really equate. You know, they just look at it, they swipe the thing. They don't realize it's a $3 play. So you can start getting your prices up, but your redemption, right? So I win 100 or 200 points, but the game cost me $2 or $3. Kids don't think that way as much when they've got the game card. So they're more free to spend the money, because all they really care about is getting the points so they can win the whatever at the redemption. These numbers are budget numbers based on a lot of actual data. So this is a center that's just about ready to open, and that's why I kind of made it blind so that I didn't give away my client. But it is a converted center. So this was a 26-lane center that it pulled out I think 12 or 14 lanes, and dropped down their bowling effort substantially. They have a really nice lounge now. They've got a really nice kind of VIP section. They didn't do a full-blown VIP room, but they used curtaining on a couple of the lanes to kind of create separation. And that's a quick cheat, too, if you have a center that doesn't have a lot of lanes and you need to leave them open for a league market, is you can use curtaining to create the effect of a private space, and it converts over. Other centers I've seen where they bring the walls all the way out for a VIP center, some of the bowlers are just going to have to be in the VIP area during leagues that week, and you kind of rotate them in, and they gripe about it, but after a while they're fine. So, all right, let's move to the last bit of this. So, when we start going in, and we're timing pretty nicely, we start looking at the ingredients. What are some of the ingredients that you can put into it? And this is an amazing center. This is a 100,000 square foot center, so don't look at this like most bowling centers are going to do this, but it was a great illustration of what's possible. So what's happening? On the adult side, of course, restaurant and bar, we talked about that. We know that having a more gourmet or a pub fare, a sophisticated, I like calling it sophisticated casual, right? Because it's still burgers and pizza, but we call them flatbreads and handhelds, right? We give them a more sophisticated name, we put them on some porcelain, and we have a completely different experience. So we have that. VIP bowling suites, this particular client that we're working with, and this is up in Canada, 2 different 4-lane VIP centers. VIP centers as a profit center can generate, again, lots of money. You can have a $500 or $600 kid's birthday party in there on Saturday. You can rent it out to corporate events. You will not have problems in a normal market. If you're doing a good job, you'll not have a problem keeping this thing busy, the VIP suites. Bocce is a new thing that we're starting to see, and the vote is out on bocce. Bocce works really well when you have kind of an empty nester community. So 55 plus, good income, they like going out and socializing. Bocce works really well. Of course, you have small balls, so it's easy. I've seen millennials will love it. We'll take bocce courts and turn it into what we call cornhole, which is, just the board with holes in it. You throw beanbags back and forth. They'll actually use bocce courts just like that. There's a lot of different things you can do with bocce courts. You do have a comment to that? You rent it by the hour, $30 an hour. I mean, it's essentially a bowling lane, maybe a little bit wider than a bowling lane. So you rent it like you'd get for a bowling lane for hourly. And you come with, of course, a choice of different games that you can play. I've seen in some situations, I've got a client who's pulling theirs out. It just per foot, they've got other things they can generate more money with. Others, it works really well, and it's a nice space for a more adult market. The adults like it. Pinstripes all seem to have bocce as like a marquee when you walk in. You see the bocce courts and things like that. They don't get utilized a lot, but people like the idea that it's there. So that's another option. Of course, get into some of the other ones. There's Cybersport is very similar to laser tag. It's actually volleyball. You drive around a little golf cart with a polo scoop, and you kind of play. It's kind of a weird little thing, but it's about 4,000 feet. That is something that you can do. It's really only adult. You don't want kids under 15 using Cybersport. So that's something. A banquet space is definitely, if you have a lot of corporate around you, and it's just you have to look around. I mean, some areas are sitting in corporate haven. Other areas are in more neighborhoods and things like that. But if you do have it, a banquet space will pay off. But again, you become more of a restaurant than you do a bowling center. Professional AV system is something that we really have to spend a little time with as we're kind of wrapping up. You're creating an experience, and hopefully in all 3 of those case studies that I showed you, the adult, the family, and the mix, the first one, the adults are looking for experience, the kids are looking for play, the mix is looking for fun. Nothing creates the atmosphere like good music, good lighting effects, and our industry has some really good vendors in this who know how to create it. I've seen a center that's a relatively old, tired center. They lowered the lights, they painted the walls black, and they put in a really nice lighting system. It completely transformed the center. It was a cheat. It was a way to kind of get around some of the architectural ugly realities of this particular center. Putting masking units with AV, with televisions on them, is a great idea in VIP suites so that they can watch the game and things like that. It can get kind of costly if you put it over 20 lanes. So there are things that you can do. You can drop down screens with projectors every 3 or 4 lanes. But the reality is that you are creating an experience. And again, bowling isn't at the center of it. We're not sport players anymore. We want to be entertained. So my wife, for example, who can't bowl and doesn't like it, will sit and watch whatever's on the screens while I'm bowling with my friends and having a good time. So over here on the family side, go-karts is a way to potentially go. I've got one of my best hybrid centers in the United States, Airway, which is in Kalamazoo. 56-lane center originally. They now have a VIP suite. They have a tap room, a beer craft tap room that stays busy. They still have, I think, 35 lanes of bowling in the center. They have arcade. They've got laser tag. They went out in their front parking lot, which has lots of frontage, and they put go-karts out front. Their whole summer economy, everything turned on its head. Where the summer, they practically closed the place down, and they couldn't get anybody to show up in the past. They put in go-karts. They put in some mini golf. Next thing you know, the place is just swamped. But it's in the front half of the building. It's in the arcade. It's in the go-karts, and it's in the mini golf. Kids will still come and bowl. Families will still come and bowl. But the bowling lanes aren't as busy. So both ends of the building stay busy. They have a beer garden in the back. They put some seating outside their tap room. But you can see all of a sudden there's all kinds of different things going on with different groups. So go-karts is there. They're expensive. I'd recommend sticking with electric ones because the gas ones are really a pain to deal with. An arcade, of course, with a prize center. The big part about that is you can go with a redemption counter or a redemption store. My big advice is to go with the store. You can handle many more kids. The throughput is greater. You can have one staff person instead of 3 or 4 manage the entire redemption area. You will have some product walk out the door, but we've done the math. And the reduction in staff costs versus the amount of shortage, number of Tootsie Rolls get stuffed in a kid's pocket, it comes out way ahead to have a store model where the kids can browse and then just check out on the way out. Ropes course, we showed you that example. Laser tag. Now, if you don't have a large footprint for laser tag, you can always create what we call a mezzanine. So you can create a second level. We've done some tricks with it. If your ceilings aren't high enough to pull two stories out, we've actually excavated under the floor. So we've taken a foot down, so there's a ramp that slopes down and slopes back up, and you actually can go underneath the mezzanine without having to do any issues with your roof. Keep it inside the existing facility. So two floors will dramatically change your revenue versus a one. It's just, I don't know what it is. The kids just have fun thinking they can go up and shoot down at the other people below them. So that's definitely a consideration. By the way, 5,000 square foot laser tag can happen in 3,500 feet. When you have a mezzanine, you can get another 1,500 feet on the second floor. So it's a way to make a bigger experience out of a smaller footprint. 16-lane lounge style bowling, that's this particular center. That's their main bowling area. They're getting into trampolines. My advice is to avoid trampolines. I don't see it having longevity with the liability issues that are creeping into that particular area. And the other side of it is state regulation is making trampolines sometimes just not fun anymore. Because you just can't go and play the way you want to play because they don't want you to get hurt. And next thing you know, you don't want to go jump on the trampolines. If you do want to go to this venue, I've got 4 clients trying to sell theirs right now. And that's another part of it is the economics just don't work. And then on the family side of things, a casual dining and bar area. So you have more of a formal dining area for the adults, a more casual dining area on the other side. So I hope that, we're kind of winding up here. I hope that what I was hoping to do is give you an idea of 3 different ways to look at these centers, the adult, the family, and if you're big enough, that mix. The reality is that your lives are going to change. And I give this speech at the end of every one of the presentations that I've ever made. If you are today in a situation where you've got a great team, they're running the place, no problems, it's kind of smooth sailing, you're the owner, operator, you're in the building, you're keeping an eye on things, but you're not there day to day, going through this transition, which will take about 18 months between feasibility and getting your dollars and selecting the vendors and finding a contractor and then building it and then redoing all of your imaging. You're not going to be able to keep your name more than likely. You're going to have to go through a name change. And you're going to have to redo all of your collateral pieces, so you have birthday and corporate brochure and new signage, a brand new website that's actually relevant to this crowd. You've also got to hire a whole new staff. You've got to have typically younger staff doing the birthday parties and working with the kids. You're going to need to have a better bartender who understands what these millennials are looking for. I mean, you're really starting a new business, not just modernizing it. What I find is somebody who walks in, oftentimes you find a guy, one of our clients here used to be the former program director of ABC Family Television, and he bought a bowling center. And he had no trouble going through this conversion because he didn't have an emotional connection to the industry before he started. He just said, oh, I get it. He says, this doesn't look like what people want to hang out with, so let's make it look like what they want these days. They didn't have to let go of some of the things that we've always known and held dear in the bowling industry. So when you start going through this process, understand if your heart's not in it, if you're not ready to make a 2 to 3 year commitment of really working pretty hard to make sure that all of these new systems, and I've kind of gone through a bunch of them, and the new staff that you're going to have to add, and getting your old staff to not sabotage it, which I've seen. I've seen a lot of bowling counter guys go out of their way to try to make it so that the new customers don't feel welcome. If you're not ready for it, then maybe it's consider other options. But the reality is that at the end of this 2-year period, you're going to be in a completely different universe. Your revenue is going to be there. You know that you're going to have a future. In other words, the center is definitely going to be down the path of a new path. The one thing I recommend to a lot of owner-operators is do your economics to have a general manager in place from day one, actually before day one. Have them be part of the development process so they understand what they're building. And it may seem like something, well, I've always run my own center, or I've always had Joe run my own center. Well, the general manager you have today may end up being in charge of bowling operations. The general manager of the future is going to have a stronger background in food and beverage because it becomes a much more sophisticated of all the different systems, all the different facility attributes that you have. The food and restaurant and bar is going to be the most sophisticated system that you guys will have to operate. You're going to upgrade your technology. You're going to have a new point of sale system. So there's lots of changes that take place. And just be prepared, not just financially, but be prepared emotionally. I've seen and worked with centers to go through this process. I've seen long-term partners, stop talking to each other. I've seen, a son finally tell dad, it's time to leave because I got to take over and run this or it's not going to be successful. And dad went on a round-the-world trip, came back 3 months later, and he finally let go. And he was really excited to see what had changed in the 3 months that he walked away and let his son take over. So that's a big part of this as well, is make sure that if you're going to make these decisions, make sure that you're comfortable with it on a personal level, because it will challenge you. I have yet to have it challenge any of these guys. Some very sophisticated operators that I've worked with, who have good skill sets. You call them and you can just tell they're in a daze at some point, usually a month after they opened. And they're like, oh, this is overwhelming. But they're not complaining that they're not making money. They're making money. They're just overwhelmed. So let's see what my time is looking like here. So we've got a few minutes left before we wrap up. And again, I appreciate your patience from the beginning here. But is there anything that I didn't cover in terms of conceptually what we're looking at by going into a modernization setting that you would like to talk about? Because there's a lot to it. I haven't talked much about the marketing end of it. I haven't talked about the human resource end of it. But let's see. I can't put it into 10-year terms. I can put it into, yeah. So first off, making money, which is the bottom line to it. Number one, most of the centers that I have seen have done this because they're motivated by declining revenue today, right? So you already have an existing threat that's probably forcing you to consider making this change. And let me just say this real quick. Don't wait too long to the point where you go start looking at banks and all they see are this over the last 5 years. And all of a sudden they're like, well, you've got declining revenue and it doesn't look good. And the way you're going to go underwater here shortly. We don't feel like we would want to take this risk. So take action while your finances are still good and you still have a strong market. So the first side of that is that you're defending your center's longevity. The second side of it is your profit when you start looking at it. Typically, your cost of sales, as far as a percentage of your occupancy, is going to be 12, 13%. Depending on what your build out is, it can be a little bit higher. Your food costs are going to be 20, 25% generally. I mean, it depends on working with a consultant will get your cost of food lower. Your service, your cost of labor with management, everybody in the building is going to be 26, 27%. So generally, you're looking at a gross, before debt service and those types of things, you're going to be wanting to look at 25 to 35%. Now, first few years, it depends on how you depreciate, I guess is the answer. If you want to depreciate your video games over 7 years, then you're flowing in a different way than if you want to take those expenses towards the beginning. So I guess I'm having a hard time answering the question. But the reality in a center that is generating, let's say, $2.5 million after going through a renovation like this is going to be pulling about 20% out of it. A center that's doing $3.5 million is going to be bringing out a slightly higher margin. And these centers, I've got centers that are doing $8 million, they're pulling out an even larger margin. Because there are some fixed costs that just don't change from center to center. You still only need a general manager whether you're 60,000 square feet or 35,000 square feet. Some of the operation, the cost of occupancy and those types of things don't change dramatically if you have a much larger center or a smaller center. So I'm not answering your question very clearly, but the margins are very good. First few years are a lot different than the next 5 years, if that helps you. All right, other questions that we've got. So what happens is they get the card gets points. And it really good, go talk to Embed or Intercard. They're the two card companies. Go talk to them because they're the ones who can kind of show you how it works. But you'll be able to eliminate 2 people from your game room at every shift if you go get away from tokens and tickets. And you don't have that expense. All right, folks, thank you very much.